Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our August VRT, the Compliance Officer Roundtable, preparing and implementing cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and SOC testing. My name is Ana Gonzalez, and I am thrilled to welcome all of you to our third session. I'm pleased and excited to be your host, and on behalf of everyone in the CrossTech payments team, I welcome you and hope you enjoyed today's agenda. Our monthly VRTs, or our monthly virtual roundtable sessions, have been created to prepare for our flagship conference, CrossTech World 2022, in Miami from November 15th to the 17th, where we will be hosting compliance and business discussions. This session will be moderated by Dora Mayorga, President of AML Americas Corp. She will be leading us in the discussions of data security, cybersecurity, privacy, and also cybersecurity, privacy disaster recovery program components. So let me introduce our great moderator, Dora Mayorga. It's a certified compliance and regulatory professional. She's a specialist with extensive experience in the non-bank financial institutions, such as money transmitters and fintechs, as well as precious metals dealers. Dora is a certified professional in anti-money laundering and terrorist financing, and her AML expertise include the design and implementation of AML and CTF programs, policies, procedures, and transaction monitoring. Dora is the president of AML Americas Corp, based in Miami, which offers consultant services for companies seeking to build a compliance culture with a business vision. And additionally, she coordinates and supervises consulting projects, manages the interdisciplinary needs of current clients with the implementation of training programs to reach potential customers and assist them with upcoming engagements. Thank you, Dora, for joining us today in our third VRT, the Compliance Officer Roundtable, preparing and implementing cybersecurity, disasters recovery, and SOA testing. For us in the CrossTech payment family, it is an honor to have Dora with us today. With no further ado, I welcome Dora, who is going to introduce our panelists for today. Thank you, Dora.
Thank you, Anna. Well, first and foremost, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for CrossTech for allowing us and inviting us to be part of such a great regular virtual meetings that we have now. I want to remind everybody in the panel to please send the questions. We're here to discuss and talk just as we were having cafecito in Miami Beach. So let's do it this way. I will be here to pass the questions that you may have to our panelists, okay? I'm gonna make a brief introduction of each of them and what they do for us. So we have Mr. Bernardo Mota. He's the president of IPLD. Bernardo is currently the president of the Brazilian Institute for the Prevention and Combat of Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism. He's also the general director of commerce of the AML Risco Reputacional. He's an expert in public policy and government management. Bernardo, thank you for joining us today. We also have Mr. DeFrantz, James DeFrantz. He has 30 years of experience in financial service regulatory compliance. He has worked with money service businesses in the United States and internationally, including consulting with money remitters, fintech leaders, and foreign exchange firm. He's a specialist in compliance in consumer and real estate lending, BSA, CRA, fair lending, consumer operations, non-deposit investment products, note department operation, assessment of all and credit approval process. He has served as senior compliance examiner at the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco, as analytical manager at the Office of the Thrift Supervision, and as a commissioned national bank examiner of the Office of the Controller of the Currency, OCC. He has a certificate from the Pacific Coast Banking School of Bank Management, a Juris Doctor from the University of San Francisco with a concentration in banking and finance, and a BA from Dartmouth College. He is a certified regulatory compliance management and certified anti-money laundering specialist. James, thank you for joining us today. Welcome. And we have Mr. Carlton West. He is from CISSP Expert. He's certified information system security professional. He has a depth expertise in banking and institutional investment system and processing. He's a senior technology and operations manager and has served as a senior vice president, chief information and operations officer for City National Bank of New Jersey, and a professional advisor and consultant to financial services companies, banks, and financial technology companies, fintechs. Welcome, Carlton. Thank you for joining us today. So now we're gonna start our discussion topics. We're gonna start with Bernardo. So Bernardo, I would like to start with you asking you a question, to start this great meeting. I think most of us have this always the same startup when we ask ourselves what we want to do. So I want to ask you, how can we manage the risk arising from cyber crimes in terms of money laundering and terrorist financing?
Thank you, Dora. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, CrossTech World, for inviting me to take part of this great panel, along with my colleagues, Carl and James. And of course, I would like to thank and welcome all of the audience here for this great discussion. I would start saying, I would start provoking the audience, provoking the panel, because I think after 20 years working in the Brazilian FIU, I concluded that the best way to combat money laundering, terrorist financing, or any kind of financial crimes or cyber crimes, any kind of crime, we have to have a clear picture of the criminal minds, and we have to enter in the criminal minds to understand what they really, what is the purpose of course, committing crimes. And the conclusion that I took was also not only they are trying to commit the crimes themselves, but of course any kind of crime, except I would say the passion of crime, any kind of crime, the intention of the commitment of the crime, of course, is getting profit from them. And cybercrime is not different from any others. And I think a good way to proceed in trying to kind of combat is the prevention part. I think we have to anticipate the decision. We have to anticipate the procedures to try to at least understand the networks and the modus operandi, people involved, the relationships between them, the purpose, the amounts involved. And I think it's important for us to bear this in mind, considering that we are talking to, for example, compliance officers, the money laundering, terrorist finance fighters here, police officers. So I think it's a good idea to start with the prevention side. And I was reading the Budapest Convention, which in my opinion is the milestone, it's the starting point for the discussions internationally of cyber crimes. It's the most important convention around the world dealing with cyber crimes. I get some I would say, some activities that we have to bear in mind when we are trying to deal with, I would say, the prevention of the cyber crimes. The first one would be, of course, the trying to avoid the undue or not authorized access to computer systems. The second one would be fraud, any kind of fraud. We are talking about document fraud. We are talking about identification fraud. We are talking about, I would say, financial transactions fraud. So we are talking about a lot of types of, a lot of phases of fraud. Of course, we have to bear also in mind the child sexual abuse, and of course, the violations of copyright, as well as the violations of the security, network security. So we have a lot of things to think about when we deal with cyber crimes. But of course, we have to think about what is in the parallel of this in terms of the financial operations, the financial transactions involved in those kind of crimes. Because with this, I think we could manage the risks of the cyber crimes themselves in terms of trying to avoid, because we can, I would say, block, or we can monitor the financial operations, trying to get the picture not only on the operations but also on the people that are behind those operations, because I think those people are the people that we have to get. At the end of the day, we have to try to of course, to punish. And the use of technology to do this, I think it's an important issue to be in discussion. For example, artificial intelligence systems of I would say to monitor the financial relationships, PEPs, the politically exposed persons involved in operations, and of course the KY policies. I would say not only know your client, but also know your employee, know your hacker. I think it's important for us to get in the mind of a hacker. So know your hacker. I would say it's a good policy for us in the prevention side to try to address. So I would start provoking, putting all of these things together, and of course, if we have more questions after the other panelists talking, I will be more than happy to keep discussing this. It's just an introduction, and I think it's important to put those things together for us to bear this in mind. So thank you very much. Bernardo. Yeah, I will be here, of course, just to discuss other questions. Thanks.
Yeah, you have great points. We have to catch up with what, the evolution of what we're dealing as compliance officers. We're not only dealing nowadays with, the crook that comes with the bag, that we have to deal with all these evolutionary things. So thank you so much, Bernardo, for your part. I'm going to give the word to James. James, we want to talk a little bit more about, what are the regulators doing and the Enablers Act. So I'll give you the word to you now.
Okay. As a former regulator, I can tell you that unfortunately the regulators, a lot of them really don't understand and appreciate this industry. And so oftentimes we're left trying to explain what it is we're doing at the same time we're being examined. To follow up on what my fellow panelists just said, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I forgot to say that, so thanks for being here. To follow up on that, the examiners really are taking a look now at cybercrime, and in particular, cybersecurity. So knowing that the criminals are out there using a lot of electronic techniques these days, the expectation from the regulators is that each and every one of us that are out here, as fintechs, as MSBs, are really doing all we can to make sure that, one, our systems are secure, two, that you're having, making sure that the agreements that you have with vendors are strong, and that you're testing the vendors on a regular basis. Just because you've had them for a long time doesn't mean you shouldn't do some form of testing. You should be looking at their SOC reports. I'm sure Carlton's going to talk a little bit about that, but you should be looking to make sure that their audits are showing that they have secure internal controls and this sort of thing. So the expectation is, it's not really new and different, but what it is that it's a real different emphasis in this area. So cybersecurity has become one of the things that they're going to take a close look at the next time you hear from either the IRS, a state regulator, or even really, and one thing I do want to point out, your independent review should be taking a look at this too. I've seen some independent reviewers that are being criticized by the regulators because they're not taking a hard look in this area. So make sure as you get your scope for your independent review that cybersecurity and data integrity is part of that independent review. The other thing I just wanted to bring out real quick, there is an act in Congress right now. It was approved by the House and is being considered by the Senate. It's called the Enablers Act. That's actually each of those letters stands for something. Long story short, what it will do, it will expand BSA to everybody. To everybody, all the people who like third-party payment processors who are often exempted will be part of the BSA going forward. So it will rock our world. It will change everything, but in a way it's good because we'll all be on a similar playing field, I think. So ultimately, I'm one of those that thinks it's good. So that's my story. I'm sticking with it now, and I'll pass it back to you.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I think that nowadays the compliance officers, we have to think more outside the BSA AML requirements only. You know, this evolution, this thing is going so fast that, you know, I guess they're coming out with new acts to help out the consumer. And we have to think as a business, you know, when we work with all these businesses. So thank you very much, James, for your feedback on this. I'm gonna give now the time for Carlton. Carlton, you want to talk to us a little bit about cybersecurity, disaster recovery programs?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me this afternoon, Anna, and hello to my fellow panelists and all attendees. I just want to build on what my fellow panelists were just saying in two ways. First, it would be great if, you know, as you are working as a compliance officer, you partner with, if you have information technology and information security professionals inside of your organization, that's key. If you don't have that knowledge, you need an external partner, and you need to understand that you're going to be held accountable for this regardless. And so are the vendors that you use who make your business go. And so a sound vendor management program is going to be critical in terms of determining which software applications you need and which systems you're running on, whether it be workstations, phones, networks, and so on. Beyond that, I did want to add a little key here, which is recently we have found in the information security space that the largest way for cybersecurity breaches to occur is actually not so much the use of systems, it's actually hacking the humans. And so the humans are easier than the systems, and the cyber criminals know this now. And so the regulators are looking for whether you have sound practices to train your staff, and even in some cases, if you have users, customers using your applications, they're going to want to know that you've got good information available so that people know how they're being protected. In that same vein, you know, you're going to be held accountable for the applications that and systems or software that you're employing, even if it's not developed by your company. And most of us are using third parties. So part of your third-party program has to include doing reviews or getting attestations from your software vendors to help understand or make clear that they're employing the best practices of security. For example, a real simple example, if you have an application that's running on Amazon Web Services, or Google Cloud Services or Microsoft Azure as a cloud platform. Many of these cloud application providers have best practices documented for developers to follow. And it's your responsibility, along with whomever you engage as your cybersecurity professional, to get attestations and proof from these vendors, along with the Service Organization Controls Report, and that they actually are applying these practices. So I just wanted to kind of go, you know, down that path a little bit.
Absolutely.
And in partnership, your cybersecurity program in partnership with a sound disaster recovery program for your shop, even if your vendors have it, you need to have it as well, documented and tested, and a sound, you know, review of the SOC reports or SOC audits from your vendors. And if you are a large enough entity providing technology-based services to financial institutions or others, and you are having SOC reviews performed on your organization, then we can certainly go into more detail in depth about what you need to do to prepare, because a SOC audit is effectively your IT audit. And if you are using your vendors' SOC reports to say, hey, your controls are sound, there's a section in that SOC report, the SOC 2 particularly, from your vendor that's called user entity controls. Okay, and those complementary user entity controls are what you as a business are supposed to be doing in order for your vendor's SOC report to actually be even valid. If you are not living up to those complementary user entity controls, then effectively you have voided the SOC review of your vendor. So it's something to really look for in that SOC report. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Yeah, that's so important. I mean, we all usually forget about our vendors and how much trust we give them, you know. It's important that we follow up on that reviews. And I think, like you say, the testing part, you know, we have to deal with so many things that we forget, oh, have they provided us their, you know, results? So that's a great point, Carlton. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so now I don't know if there's any questions from the visitors or from everyone here, or we can continue here. Let's see what I got. I mean, we should take advantage. We have our former regulator here, so let's take a look here. James, what do you think are some potential regulatory actions from a bad review?
You know, we work with a number of folks now, money service businesses and fintechs that have gotten really bad reviews. We're working with one currently that got a 5. And wow. So it's bad, it's upsetting, but it's not the end of the world. The thing of it is, and I agree with Carlton, I think it's important that you take on some expertise and make sure that you have people that can represent you well. Most regulators, I think, you know, speaking for myself, if someone is able to explain to me that they understand the problem, they understand what needs to be done, and have generally is what's needed outcomes. So when you get to enforcement actions such as a cease and desist or something like that, it's generally because one, they found the same problems more than once. Mm-hmm. 2, there's not really a good plan in place to address what the problem is. Or 3, we have a plan, but we're not implementing the plan. So the idea here is that a bad review is not the end of the world, but you do have to respond. You have to respond in a way that indicates you understand what the issue is, correct. And then put a plan together and implement that plan.
The acknowledgement, that's correct. Yeah. And it's important because that will help. I mean, the regulators are coming here and they really don't know our business. So it's important that we have that plan so they can follow it, because they just need the most we can give them in order for them to get it. Really good points, James. Thank you so much.
If I may, I would like to make a comment. Of course, yeah, I agree. I am 100%. I agree with James in terms of the perspective by the regulator. But I would add to this perception. I would say the law enforcement side too. Of course, my experience is from governmental bodies, and I took the opportunity to work with those law enforcement agencies here in Brazil. And of course, we have to bear in mind in terms of the repressive side, in terms of investigations, the prosecutions of the crime itself. I think it's important to bear in mind that, yeah, having a very clear and updated legal framework is important for everybody. Yeah. It's clear, it's obvious. And second, have kind of I would say tools to deal with, especially to be prepared for dealing with the critical infrastructure, which I think it's important for our side to have, the clear picture of what we are talking about, where we are talking about, where those cyber crimes is occurring. But I think the last one, which is the most important thing that we have to bear in mind, is I would say the magical acronym with the PPP, the public-private partnership. I think it's quite important to have coordinated actions, coordinated initiatives, because I think one depends on the other. We are talking about the governmental bodies, but of course we have to include in this initiative the private sector, because I think it's in their space, in their environment, that we can see the environmental the cyber crimes happen. So I think this partnership is quite crucial for being effective in terms of dealing with and combating the cyber crimes. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you so much. Carlton, what about you? What industry frameworks do you think regulators expect financial service entities to align their information security programs with? What you can tell us about that?
Sure. I would build on what Bernardo was just saying, because that is one of the public-private partnership points, if you will, which is in the United States, for example, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, is where government agencies and the regulators get their standards for technology and information security and so forth. So they actually have a cybersecurity and privacy framework. There's one also from the International Standards Organization, and they're very closely linked. But interestingly enough, kind of building on the points that James brought up earlier as well, the NIST framework looks for you to cover a number of bases by proactively identifying potential vulnerabilities and threats. So, risk assessments, penetration tests, some of the vendor reviews we talked about earlier. They want you to then have protection schemes in place. So it's identify, protect, and then another one is detect. If you have been breached in some way, including a breach of a human, someone has gotten your information or is utilizing your systems without your knowledge, do you have tools in place to detect those things? Then once you know about something that's going wrong, do you have the ability to respond? And so there's a piece of your information security program that is supposed to be called incident response, and it needs to be broken out in detail within your documented policy for information security. And it needs to be tested as part of your information security program, no different than you test your disaster recovery program. And you can test it a number of ways to respond to different types of incidents, even if it's sitting around as a business and having what they call a tabletop discussion, as though you were just breached, what would you do? And the regulators are looking for these types of exercises to happen. And then finally, there's recovery. No different than disaster recovery, where you need to respond after a potential act of God or something like that. Same thing for a cyber incident. How, after you detected it and made sure that you've addressed it, how are you now getting back to a point where you're rebuilding the reputational trust of your organization? So the frameworks that are part of the public-private partnership, such as the NIST cybersecurity and privacy framework, are very clear in laying out what is expected. And there are tools to handle the humans, the programming, the network, and the infrastructure and the vendors that should be laid out in your policies and your practices. Let me finalize by just saying this, Anna. It's the things we're talking about for a very small organization, financial services type of organization that's not a bank. Even for some small banks that I've worked with and worked at, these things seem fairly sophisticated and, let's face it, expensive in terms of both time and resources. I can tell you, there is no substitute at this point. The regulators are not letting anyone off the hook. And that's why it extends to the third parties as well. And that's why everyone is shaking their heads. Yes, this is something that must be done.
There's no more saying, "Oh, I didn't know." It's You've been through it, we've been through it, we knew where it was going. Exactly.
Exactly. And it doesn't matter what you used to get away with, if you will.
Exactly.
And I hate to put it that way, but whatever it used to be the standard, the bar is now raised. And so if you don't know these frameworks, such as the NIST framework, then you really don't know what you're being held accountable to. And it's imperative to find out and get expertise to help you get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just want to add, one of the things I used to hear all the time as a regulator was, well, you were here last time and didn't have a problem with it. That doesn't work anymore. That's never, that doesn't work. And I strongly advise against ever saying that, because it really ticks off the, the regulator.
Yeah,
Don't,
definitely.
last 3 times it was fine. Don't say that.
Yeah, it's not a smart thing to do, and it's not a realistic. Like when it started, maybe, you know, the first time, but really, like, we get the tools, we get the directions. We, as compliance officers, we understand what the regulator means, you know, once we hear it, because, you know, we were getting there maybe. So that's a great point. So James, now that I have you here, what about to prepare for an examination? What can we give our listeners right now?
Prepare for an examination. Again, I think you have to start with the idea that the regulators really aren't there to trick you or be mean to you or anything like that. It really just is a test of your compliance system. So don't start off being mad or upset or anything like that. Also, never, if you don't know an answer to a question, I don't know is a really good answer. You can always say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
I would, in preparing for the examination, you can get the list of what they're going to ask for actually way ahead of time. You can actually get that on a regular basis from the examiner before they actually send the official one. Take one of those lists and kind of go through it. Have you updated your policies and procedures in the last year? Because that's low-hanging fruit for an examiner. I'll just say, you know, policy not updated in a year. Is training, has everybody gotten their training, and do you have a record of the training? Remember this, examiners are taught, if it's not documented, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. So document. You can definitely review, or you want to make sure, if you don't have some sort of compliance committee or something like that, make sure that you have the ability to document what you're doing with transaction information, how you're monitoring it, how you're looking at potential suspicious activity, how you're resolving that. So you can have a case that looks suspicious, but you've contacted the customer, they've given you the requisite information. Document that. That's the thing, is that just because you can't say, well, I talked to him and it's fine. The examiner will then say, well, we don't have any proof of that. So I would say definitely review documentation, review your policies and procedures, have get that checklist ahead of time and compare what you have in place to the checklist.
Yeah, the training is fundamental. Like, we do so much training. I always say, as a compliance officer, we train every day, you know? So what I started doing is documenting my training, have a specific book. When I talk to my employees, when I talk to my, you know, anyone, I just like, okay, this kind of, you know, the documenting of the training is, sometimes we let it fly.
Dora, can I add on to what James was saying? Just one additional point. Additionally, start with whatever was on the last exam as well, by the way, because repeat findings are a no-no. So if you have a finding from the last exam, make sure that you've addressed it prior to the next exam and that you have proof that you've addressed it, so that you know, the regulator doesn't start you at a deficit from what you had before. Definitely.
Always use that as a guide. And
I can also, I share with you just a good experience that we have in Brazil. It was a cooperation between the federal police and the Federation of Banks. It was a very good, I would say, collaborative work between, I would say, law enforcement agents and the Federation of Banks, which was interesting, because at the end of the day, the conclusion was that two things are important to deal with, especially examination, but also with the prevention as a whole against cybercrime: intelligence and training. So I think at the end of the day, a best practice that we can share is of course, intelligence, good information on the scenario that you are dealing with, that you are preventing, or that you are kind of trying to combat, because you have to understand the situation around you. And intelligence is important for this. Good information, good, and I say complete detailed information, but of course the training. At the end, having people trained is I think it's one of the best way to, of course, to anticipate to future threats. So I think I agree with all of the panelists here.
And one thing I forgot to mention, examiners, when they give a recommendation, it's not a recommendation.
It's an order.
Yeah, I want to go back to that what Carlton said, not just the findings, but whatever recommendation they give.
Definitely. Yeah, so we have to make it to the T. That's good. That's a good point. Yeah, we're here. That's why we're compliance officers. We're here expressing ourselves, but that's absolutely true, James. Yeah.
If I could add one point to what Bernardo was saying regarding intelligence, one of the things that is expected now is threat intelligence from a cyber perspective. And there are sources that, banks and other government agencies and other industries have, but non-banks also. So, for example, in the United States, there's an organization, CISA or CISA, as people refer to them. They push proactive threat intelligence about new vulnerabilities, cyber vulnerabilities, things that are happening because of conflicts around the world, or even sometimes just disagreements between nation states and other things that show increased activity amongst certain hacking groups. And so they let you know what's happening. Also, if a particular vulnerability was found and identified in a particular industry, in our case, financial services, they let us know so that we can proactively address it. Some of us have received letters or emails from our regulators or our banks asking us, hey, what have you done about such and such vulnerability? And if it catches you by surprise, that's not good. So as we said earlier, you should be engaging a cyber professional if you don't have one in-house. And one of their duties should be monitoring these information sharing channels so that you can get this threat intelligence from CISA. There's the financial services, ISAC, FSISAC, there's others out there. But get it before it hits the mainstream media. By then it's too late and you may already be compromised.
Absolutely, yeah. The tools are there, all the companies are there. We know how to do the diligence in our providers and our service providers. So we just have to use them, like really utilize them. Okay. Anything, I don't know if we have any questions from the, okay. Let's see. I think we have covered a lot of the important cybersecurity questions that we had and we wanted to cover today. What about, what can we say about disaster recovery? I want to touch a little bit more into that. I don't know if any of my panelists want to touch on that.
I can jump into some of that if that's okay, Dora.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. From a disaster recovery standpoint, it's very similar to anything else. There is a framework for disaster recovery. Each company should have something, a document, and it's effectively a risk assessment. So this is your planning and detection, if you will. It's basically go through your business and perform what's called a business impact analysis, or a BIA. This is supposed to be done before you actually document a disaster recovery plan. And the two documents go hand in hand. So if you have a disaster recovery plan and you don't have a BIA, the regulator is going to see that. If you have a BIA and a disaster recovery plan, you are supposed to review your business impact analysis annually. And all it is you going through your business and saying, what do we need in order to actually operate? And what can we do without? And how long can we do without it? It's each business function, it's each system, it's your business equipment. And then you have to say, look, if a huge disaster hit us, for example, how are we going to continue to operate and meet these requirements? That's what's supposed to be in your disaster recovery plan. And then you're supposed to test to make sure that you can meet those things. And the technical terms for that are you're supposed to have a recovery point objective that's defined in your business impact analysis, which means if we have a disaster today, can we recover all of our data and our capabilities to the exact same place today where the disaster happened, or maybe it's yesterday? That's your RPO, or recovery point objective. Then there's the recovery time objective, which is how long does it take us to recover? Some large organizations are going to have very robust disaster recovery sites and all that good stuff, extra systems. Small organizations are going to be challenged and may rely heavily on third parties. You may have things in your particular production site, your main office, and you have to be able to account for how will you do business if those systems, the processes, and then we just came out of the pandemic, so let's throw it out there. If your people are interrupted because the people might be unavailable due to a pandemic. So one section of your disaster recovery plan needs to be a pandemic plan to say how you will operate in the event of a pandemic, and where, you know, maybe your systems and everything are okay, but your people are not.
Correct.
Picking up the points, I think very important points made by Carl. I would say that, of course, we can have good manuals, good infrastructure, good security, good, I would say, softwares to deal with, of course, the disaster. But I think the weakest component of the system is the human being. So the people involved in this must be very aware, very committed, and very engaged with those manuals, those rules, those procedures. Because if it's not the case, so we cannot recover any kind of disaster. So I would just put this because, of course, if you take the statistics of the disasters, I would say the majority of the disaster, the human component was involved in most of the cases. So I think it's just for us to bear this in mind, because good manuals do not work alone.
Yeah. Training and implementation of such. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have a final question before we start with our closing. I want to make like a general question and anyone can answer. I want to see, where do you guys consider, where do you see or envision the evolution of cybersecurity? Are we going to get more? Where is it that you see it going? The cybersecurity requirements.
I can say safely we're going to have more, and the only reason I say that is the systems are becoming more sophisticated in terms of how they're built and maintained. They are becoming easier to use, and that's by design. We want that as consumers. And so as these systems become easier to use, what is unseen by the public is becoming more complex, and there's a lot more information shared. Well, let's start with, there's a lot more information available, and a lot more information shared. And there's a huge leap in my lifetime, certainly, between what was technologically feasible, 10, 20, 30 years ago, versus what we can expect to see in the next 5 to 10 years. You can expect that the technology will grow by leaps and bounds, and it will be in places that we could not have expected. And every one of those places has to be secured. You have to secure your refrigerator for the Internet of Things. Your car is going to be a user interface. It's going to be a very different environment, let's just say. And so computers are not going to be necessarily where cybersecurity is. It's going to be in everything.
In everything, correct. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, the world is becoming digital. I think we have to be aware of this. It's the way that we have to face now. So I think I like very much a document published by FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, that is called the digital transformation. We put all of this in terms of not only the financial products, the financial system, fintechs, and all of this in terms of the digital world, but also the way to deal with it. For example, the official digital documents. Now you have your ID in the cell phone. So I think we have to walk beside the digital transformation, because I think all the time we have to follow behind crimes. So you have to wait the crimes to happen, to address, try to get to understand the situation, and then deal with the crime. So I think we have to walk beside for us to better understand the scenario and better prevent against cybercrime, considering that all of this technology tools, all of the digital transformation that we are facing now are a reality, and we have to live with this.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much all. Thank you all for all the great feedback we got. I think we're getting closer to the time. I'm gonna call Anita back so she can tell us more about our next VRT and do the closing statements for today. Thank you everybody for letting me lead this. I really enjoyed it. I think we got very good points, and I'm gonna invite Anna to come back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's been a great discussion. Thank you, Dora, so much. I think we have not only like highlights on the industry, but we also know what to expect. So I think it was a very well done day discussion and moderation of the panel. We are very thankful. We're excited to, not only closing this time of learning experiences, but also invite everyone that is watching to our upcoming VRT. But before that, Bernardo Mota, James DeFrantz, Carlton West, it's been a pleasure on behalf of everyone in the CrossTech payment teams. We thank you and we appreciate the time that you're here leading us in very interesting discussions. Dora, as always, she's part of our family. We feel honored and pleased to have you here. So thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.
Thanks to you. It's been a great, I think sometimes people might think it's such a complex topic, but I think it's something that Bernardo just said it, and we're going to technology, and that's how our world it's turning into. And knowing all of these different elements, it's important for us to keep this technological environment safe for us as clients and for us also as companies that are serving the community. For everyone that is watching, like I said, we expect to see you here. We're going to see each other on the 27th of September, this same time, and we're going to be hosting our fourth VRT. Remember that our VRTs were created to lead the way, or it's a road to our flagship conference, CrossTech World 2022 in Miami, from the 15th of November to the 16th. Our next VRT will be on compliance risk assessment, management of internal and external risks, and contingency measures. So I can't wait to see everyone once again in our VRTs. See you in the next, and thank you, panelists and wonderful moderator. See you in the next time.
Thank you. Thank you. See you all next time.
Okay.